Today we are starting a reading of the book The Psychology of Gratitude by Divaldo Franco, channeled from the spirit Joanna de Angelis. This is a reading of the first passage of the book. It is called, just like the book, The Psychology of Gratitude. Allegories have always been a part of the collective unconscious of society during the difficult times in history. It was through them, as well as fairy tales and folklore, that it became possible to present logical explanations for the complexities of phenomena in life, whose circumstances make the latter acceptable for the scope of myths, encompasses all questions related to human beings. The great masters of the past accomplished all their teachings in a symbolic form, including Jesus, who made use of allegories to perpetuate the lessons in the psyche of his listeners, engraving them vigorously during the following 20 centuries since his sojourn with us. Although presented under other names, admirable psychotherapies have been employed with patients in severe conditions by subjecting them to the narration of stories and therefore healing them, much like some specialists today who make use of mythological symbols, some real, others extracted from the Old, as well as the New Testament, with the final goal of rehabilitation. Therefore, mythology became the essential psychology that contributes to the awakening of individuals, so they may decide to mobilize the available recourses in their unconscious to their own advantage. It is always valid to resort to one's own mysteries, whether to achieve relevant goals and work them in favor of the inner renovation of the individual, or to resubstantiate the concepts and proposals that have not yet been consolidated in either the individual behavior or the collective one. Different presentations of the same chronicles occur among mythologists, very likely as a result of how they comprehend or interpret them. The myth of Perseus, much like the allegory of Plato's cave and many others, has been the object of several interpretations wherein the courage of the hero is adapted to the psychological aim of the narrator. We bring him to our pages in a modest, synthesized form, wherein we demonstrate the strength of the moral values in defending our loved ones and of our struggles founded on forgiveness, with the objective of building both harmony and happiness. As it is known, according to Greek mythology, Perseus was the son of Danae, an earthly being, and of Zeus, god of Olympus. An oracle had prophesied to Danae's progenitor, King Acrisius, that his own grandson would eventually assassinate him. Thus forewarned, he took immediate precautions to distance his daughter from any possible suitor. Zeus, however, lusted for her, and for this very reason broke into her confinement in the form of a shower of gold, from whose encounter Perseus was later born. When knowledge of his grandparenthood reached the Argosian king, he decreed that his daughter and grandson be gold in a wooden box and thrown to the sea, in the hope that they would perish by drowning. After being informed of such perverse contrivance, Zeus blew gentle winds that lulled the box off to the shores of an island, where it was rescued from the seas by a humble fisherman, who provided them with shelter under the auspices of the local king. Nonetheless, Danae was constantly subjected to the insidious persecution from that king, whom Perseus later confronted. As a condition to save Perseus's mother, the king proposed to Perseus that he brought the head of Medusa, one of the Gorgons, a threatening monster that transformed in stone anyone who dared look directly at its horrid face. Perseus needed the assistance of the gods to defeat Medusa. His father, Zeus, as a token of blazing love, ruled that Attis, the lord of the underworld, lend him a special helmet with which he would become invisible. Whereas Hermes shod Perseus with flying sandals, and Athena fit him with a sharp sword and a shield so polished that it turned into a mirror, reflecting every image that reached it. Armed with such a shield, Perseus was able to look at the mirror image of Medusa, avoiding a direct gaze at her, and thus managed to lop off her head. The victorious hero came back home jubilant. Yet, in his return voyage, he met a beautiful maiden who was chained to a nearby boulder by the sea, where she was expected to be devoured by a monster. The hero became aware of her name, Andromeda, and her and of her predicament to be sacrificed as punishment to her mother's indiscretion in order to appease the gods whom her mother had offended. Perseus fell in love with Andromeda at once and rescued her by displaying the head of Medusa to the sea monster, which became petrified thereupon. Afterwards, he brought the maiden to live with his mother, who had since moved to the temple of Athena in order to flee from the assailings of the ambitious and depraved king. In desperation, Perseus turned to stone all his mother's enemies by raising and displaying the head of Medusa, and thereafter offered it to Athena, who emblazoned it on her shield, which henceforth became the insignia of that goddess. Grateful to the gods, Perseus returned the precious gifts to them and lived in happiness with Andromeda. Nevertheless, during the athletic games, at a much later date, the disc that he threw was blown outside the stadium by the winds and ended up killing an elderly man. Distressingly, the elder was Acrisius, Perseus's grandfather, a tragedy that confirmed the prediction of the oracle. Since Perseus was not an ambitious man, overwhelmed by grief and sadness, he did not wish to govern the kingdom that naturally belonged to him by ancestral heritage. So he requested from the king of Argos that they exchanged the regions of the two kingdoms. The king of Argos acceded, and Perseus later built the beautiful city of Mycenae, where he lived with his wife and children by his side. The name Perseus means destructor, and in mythology, many psychological elements are dynamic, such as Acrisius's fear, his concern about not reaching old age, the rigorousness of the punishments to those that might be a means to his death, as well as the leniency of Zeus, who protected his beloved wife and son, and the efforts of the latter, who risked his life to save his mother from a disagreeable situation and set off to kill the monster that destroyed lives. Perseus's love for Andromeda, who promotes him to the status of savior of innocent victims, is also present. In this allegory, Perseus punishes evil and cruelty, has the generosity of returning the gifts, and of being grateful to the gods who ultimately assisted him in his successful enterprise. And he suffers with the death of this grandfather, renouncing his rightful claim to the throne, which he exchanges for another. We find these archetypes in all human beings in whom courage has triumphed through love, whence gratitude has evolved from emotional maturity, and the protection of the weak has developed from compassion and renunciation to transitory assets. Perseus was victorious because he discovered the psychological significance of his existence, which was to save his mother, conquer his inward enemies, persevere towards elevated ideals, and recognize his own vulnerability when confronting the existential vicissitudes. Fear no longer assaults or afflicts those who wish to reach victory over external factors, eliminating the medusas that lie within them, for their vibrational level is channeled into the idealism for love and unremitting goodness that prevail with great significance and never allow resentment or vindictiveness to mar their behavior. This persistent march onwards takes the fighter to individuation after having crossed all the tempests of the ego and shadow. The psychology of gratitude becomes a competent instrument along the ego self axis, and it should be exercised at all moments of the corporeal existence as a secure guide in fulfilling its reality. Those who cultivate gratitude, the child of psychological maturity, are enriched with peace and happiness. In these days of violence and cruelty, as well as indifference for relevant moral and emotional values, gratitude has a significant role regarding the integral health of human beings. We live the frenzy of mundane and toxic pleasures under the vigorous pressure of materialism, which dominates terrestrial society without any opportunity for the spirits that we are. All the fearless per se are thus called upon to this battle, which shows no boundaries. Those who are capable of overcoming the bitter circumstances by means of their unwavering faith in God, who sees after all its creatures. We hope that this modest psychological contribution may assist the modern man and women in the great enterprise of self accomplishment. Salvador, January 1st, 2011. Joanna De Angelis.